Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Trey, and I want to talk about comic book YouTubers. The reason why I want to talk about comic book YouTubers is because I had a message that was given to me about how it's comic book YouTubers' fault about how the comic book industry is failing, and it's the fault of the comic book YouTubers is the reason why. And it got me wondering, like, what do you mean? Because I asked a person that. Basically trying to say because comic book YouTubers don't talk about independent comic books is the reason why comic book industry is failing. And I'm like, that doesn't make any logical sense. Comic book YouTubers talk about comic books. They talk about all kinds of comic books, no matter big, small, medium, low, all that kind of stuff, from DC or Marvel. And sometimes they do talk about independent comic books, but the guy was basically trying to say because most comic book channels only focus on the big two and not independent comic books, it's our fault, why the comic book industry is failing. And I just kind of find that such a stupid argument, to be honest, because it's just like, why are you blaming regular people for the failings of the industry itself? Nobody told the industry to screw up. Nobody told the industry to make crap books that nobody cares about. Nobody told them to do any of that kind of stuff. And yet, it's the comic book YouTubers' fault because they don't talk about more independent comic books? I'm sorry, that's not on the comic book YouTubers. That's on independent comic books themselves. It's not, they're not behest to talk about anything that they don't want to. You know what I mean? Like, people got to get that out of their head. Nobody owes nobody anything. Just like nobody owes me anything to watch my channel or support anything that I do. If I decide if I want to, like, do art or anything. You know what I'm saying? I don't expect you guys to just support me just because. You guys aren't owed to me like that. And it's the same thing with comic books. Even independent comic books, because there are some good independent comic books out there, but people aren't going to go out there because most people are so used to DC and Marvel. I mean, back in the day when DC and Marvel was growing up, there was commercials on, there was a lot of things to really get you to realize that comic books were here when I was growing up anyway. I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I'm just saying, when I was growing up, comic books were everywhere. There were commercials, there were, pop-up places and stuff like that. Sometimes when you get an action figure, there were comic books inside it. Like, I remember some of my earliest comic books came from toys that I got. Like, I had this Spider-Man 2099 and this War Machine action figure. And in the back was issue number 1 of War Machine and issue number 1 of Spider-Man 2099. And, there was things like that. There were so much out there for the comic books. And even with independents, they have to kind of do the same thing. You got to put some time and effort into that kind of stuff, because people aren't going to go out there and find you. You have to kind of find them. You know what I'm saying? Like, but to sit up there and be like, oh, it's the audience fault for the reason why things are failing, it just doesn't make any logical sense. So I guess he got mad at me and stuff, was like saying that no, because we're comic book YouTubers shouldn't be talking about DC and Marvel, they should only be talking about independent stuff or whatever. And I'm just like, but that's in your opinion. Just because you go out there and read independent comic books doesn't mean that everybody's going to read independent comic books. Remember, the comic book industry mostly been DC and Marvel. When you talk about comic books, most people talk about DC and Marvel. They don't really talk about Image or any other independent, Boom Studios, Valid. You know what I'm saying? They don't talk about that kind of stuff. That's not what people think of when they think of the big two. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of stuff. It's just that, be honest with yourself. You can't sit up there and say, oh, it's the fault of comic book YouTubers for not, promoting more independent work. I'm sorry to tell you this. There are comic book YouTubers who talk about independent things all the time. And like I said, Nerdette, Thinking Critical, Yellow Flash, Perch, You know, it's your boy Zach. What's his goddamn name? Just Some Guy. They talk about independent comic book stuff. They really do. But nobody seems to care sometimes. Like, those views don't really do much because people don't care about independence like that. And on top of that, they've been jaded by the comic book industry. You can't blame people for not really trusting it. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that there aren't any good independent comic books. There are. I got a few of them myself that I need to finish up reading so I can talk about and make a video about them. But still, it's a rarity, and you just can't blame people for not wanting to read it or get upset that all people talk about is DC and Marvel. Well, DC and Marvel's been around for 80 to 60 years. I don't know what the hell to damn tell you. You know what I'm saying? You fighting against 80 to 60 years of history that people are well aware of. A lot of these people got their comic books from their grandparents, and their grandparents got theirs from their grandparents and fathers and mothers and stuff like that. It is what it is. But to solely put all that blame on a few people just because just doesn't make logical sense. I understand, like, but my thing is, if you want independent comic books to do more, why don't you make a video, or why don't you do some promotion for it? At the same time, you gotta be hesitant to independence. They have to also do the marketing too. They have to do the work, just like DC and Marvel has to do the work too. We can't keep taking the fault for the comic book industry, independent or mainstream. That is not our job. Our job is to talk about comic books, whether comic books we love or comic books we hate. We talk about comic books in general. That's what it is. But you can't expect people to just sit up there and talk about what you think they should talk about in the comic book industry. It just doesn't work like that. You know, we all gonna have our thoughts. We're all gonna have our opinions. But at the same time, we don't owe the comic book industry anything. And that's all facets of the comic book industry. We don't owe the comic book industry anything but, hey, well, if we like it, we'll buy it. If we don't, we'll make a video about it and talk about how terrible it is, or might not even mention it. It is what it is. But don't blame comic book industry. Don't blame comic book YouTubers for that, because it's not their fault. And that's my thoughts on the matter. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.